Hello, good people of YouTube, Mountbatten here, and today we are going to discuss the so-called nerfing of the Schlieffen, the new, well still relatively new, Tier 10 German battlecruiser. So when the Schlieffen was first introduced last patch, well patch before last, there was an interesting bug that accompanied the ship into the game, where all secondary mounts, torpedo tubes, anti-aircraft guns, and apparently some main battery turrets too, could not be destroyed. Which seemed like a fairly convenient bug to introduce into the game, along with a secondary focused battleship split line like the German battlecruisers. So many a theorist took to the forums and Reddit and YouTube comments and the such, and quickly stated that this was simply to make the Schlieffen overperform so that she could be nerfed harder post-release. And then with this patch, well, actually they did make an announcement last patch about the bug. The announcement was simply that they were going to throw their hands up and say that, well, it's a problem with the code. We're not touching that till we get back from our New Year's and Christmas holidays. And touch it they did. With the release of this patch, the bug has since been removed, which has led many a commenter ask, well, how's Schlieffen post-nerf? Well, I wouldn't really call this a nerf, but since that's apparently what it's being called, we'll go ahead and look at it like that. So Schlieffen is, of course, the pinnacle of the German battlecruiser tech line, and boy, what a pinnacle it is. The Schlieffen, if you don't know, has 40 secondary guns. That's like Age of Sail Man of War level amount of guns. That's just the secondaries. Now, of course, it does have the 8 420mm 16-inch main battery guns to back those up. And she's got 24 105mm guns. And then she gets 16 of the 150mm guns. Now, the 105mm guns are, of course, the same deck mounts that you see on many of the mid to higher tier German battleships and battle cruisers. And the 150s are mounted in the hull and casemate mounts. Now, the bulk of the Schlieffen secondary armament is the 105s. Now, these are up on the deck, exposed, and would naturally probably be the first to fall victim to being destroyed. The way that module destruction works in World Warships, there's, of course, well, I've seen some weird stuff happen with torpedoes, but most of the time when you get a main battery or secondary battery or torpedo tube knocked out, it's probably going to be from an HE shell. HE shells, of course, have an area of damage effect when they hit a ship, because, of course, they are HE. They explode upon contact, and they also have a chance to start a fire. Now, of course, the area of effect is determined by the caliber of the gun shooting at you. Destroyer guns aren't going to have the same area of effect as something like the Thunderer's 18-inch guns will, which is one reason why the British battleships are so darn good at ripping modules off of ships. They have large caliber guns with good HE, with very good HE alpha, and naturally that leads to, shoot, I've had all of my AA and a Montana ripped off by a Conqueror in 2 salvos before. That was frickin' painful. So naturally, those are some of the best ships to rip secondaries and torpedo mounts off of ships. Or you could have the very rare case of an AP shell incapacitating a secondary or torpedo module. It, of course, can happen. The only problem is with AP, you have to actually directly hit the mount that you wish to destroy. Now, of course, it does happen by just accident with the nature of RNG. When you've got, ships like the Montana and the Conqueror and the GK with large amounts of guns being fired at the target, you'll probably take a secondary mount or two every now and then, but it's much more common for HE to rip these amounts off. Now, there are, of course, ways to mitigate this with your ship. You can take the secondary module, the very first secondary module, which doubles the survivability of the secondary mounts and the AA mounts as well by doubling their HP. Other than that, there's not much more that you can do. I used to be of the belief that the preventive maintenance skill actually increased the survivability of the secondary guns. It doesn't, and it for some reason took me a year to realize that. And unfortunately, I kept saying it a few times, even though I knew it was incorrect, but that doesn't help. But doing that on German battleships is usually more than enough to make sure the bulk of your secondaries stay in the fight. Now, if you go put that secondary module on any other battleship and go into battle and expect your secondaries to survive the battle, well, most of them to survive the battle, you'd be surely disappointed. Because for some reason in this game, the German battleships are apparently the only ones that actually put armor on their secondary mounts. Now, of course, in game we can't view the armor on the secondary mounts, and it's probably in the code, I would imagine. It's probably that they just have a stupid amount of HP compared to other battleships' secondary mounts. Like if you take an Alsace into battle and build into its secondaries, which isn't necessarily a bad idea. Well, before the commander rework, it wasn't a bad idea. After the commander rework, I wouldn't say it's worth it, because she does have a lot. They do have a very high fire rate. Same goes for the Jean Bar, too. But one good salvo of HE, and most of those secondaries are going to be dead. Same with the Republic too. Republic pre-commander rework, you could build into the secondaries and it would have actually pretty darn good secondaries. She had the longest range secondaries in the game until after the rework, but same thing. You eat one good salvo of HE and there goes all your secondary mounts. Now with the Germans having the improved health pool of the secondary mounts, they are usually quite a bit more survivable. I can tell you from playing GK, it was a very rare game if I had all my secondaries destroyed on one side of the ship. And I'm talking about a game where I was like absolutely pinned down by a Thunderer or HE spammy cruiser, something that just wanted to burn me down. After taking repeated rounds of HE to the decks, yeah, most of your secondaries are going to be destroyed, even in something like the GK. So the Schlieffen, how's she doing post-bug fix or post-nerf, depending upon what you want to call it? Well, this game you've been watching in the background, I was a little bit too giddy in the beginning, if you will. Got too close to the action. Now, because the Schlieffen does have a secondary range that is essentially its detection range, you can kind of afford to do that, but I was not paying attention, and this is very early in game, which I really shouldn't be this close at all, and you definitely shouldn't be this close at all in any type of battleship this early on in game. So I took quite a bit of beating at the beginning. And on this match, on this side of the map, if we're still on this side of the map, on the eastern side of the map, on the sea cap, there's a Marlborough and a Gear, an Henri, and there's a DD, and I believe a GK as well, all on this side. They all take a pretty good chunk out of me at the beginning. Now, three of those ships are, well, two of those ships are really good at HE spamming. One's a decent HE spammer. The Marlborough, that's the only darn thing it's good at. It's got 16 14-inch guns. Now, it's not insane British levels of BBHE because it does have 16 guns, but it still has frickin' 16 guns. Then we've got the Henri IV, which is a very good HE spammer and really good AP2 on there. And then we have the Gear, which is a decent HE spammer. Its AP is kind of its stronger suit, but it can definitely work. And the entire time I'm running from this flank, I'm constantly getting HE spammed by these three ships. I think the Marlborough gives up at one point and switches to AP, which isn't really a bad idea considering how big the superstructure is on the Schlieffen, and with 14-inch AP, British BB AP too, you could probably chunk the superstructure on the Schlieffen pretty good as well. And just wait until the end until you see how many secondary mounts I lost in this match. A match where I was far too close in the beginning, got slapped in it, got HE spammed back to I think like almost the freaking 10 line. And then I'm doing all this stuff that you're probably seeing pop up on screen right now as well. Now, the secondaries on the Schlieffen are, of course, a main source of damage. It's definitely one of the few ships that can say that. Even the GK, you'll regularly find yourself doing around the same amount of damage with the main battery guns, if not more. But the Schlieffen, it's not very rare for these secondaries to outpace the main battery guns in terms of damage. Now, of course, to do that, you have to use an unusual build that I normally don't run on German battleships because of their improved HE pins. If you don't know, the Germans have an HE pin value where you take the caliber divided by 4 rather than, I believe it's divided by 8 on the regular HE mathematical calculation, so they get better pins. But even with that, the 105s are so small that if you want them to pin 32 millimeters of armor, which is the standard threshold for most battleships' hulls at tier 10, well, not the standard, especially not anymore, but it used to be the standard threshold. I should say the last major armor threshold you have to cross at tier 10. You have to take IFHE, which unfortunately cuts the fire chance in half. And I normally say that's usually not worth it, especially on like tier 9 German battleships where, you know, you can be top tier, and see tier 7 ships where the ability to pin 27 millimeters is enough. But on the Schlieffen, it's most definitely worth it. On the GK, all of her secondaries are 128, so they can all pin 32 millimeters of armor, no problem. So when you do that, you give the 105s over 32 millimeters of pin, and they get the 150s over 47, but you cut that damage in half. But the Schlieffen has 40 secondary guns, like I said earlier. The GK only has 24. So just through the sheer volume, you don't really care about setting fires, because with IFHE, you're pinning what you need to pin, and then you're just simply overwhelming everything else with your secondaries and absolutely melting them down with them. So how has the Schlieffen kept up since the bug fix? Well, the match you're watching right now, with me derping early on in game, getting slapped like I should for derping early on, and being HE spammed back to almost the freaking 9-10 line, sorry, the J line, I lost a grand total of 1 secondary mount in this match. 1. Out of the 40. Out of the 24 105mm guns, well, the 12 mounts that are absolutely everywhere on the mid-deck of the Schlieffen, out of the 8 150mm casemate guns, I lost 1 mount. And that was to AP, of all things. And as you can see by the end result screen here, this was taken from Friday night's live stream. The secondaries still performed fantastically well. I still got 500 secondary hits. So I believe it's safe to say that the bug fix isn't going to vastly change the performance of the Schlieffen. And of course, I'm not basing this just on this game. I of course love the Schlieffen. It's a very, 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 very good contender for kicking the GK off my top list of favorite ships. I've been playing her a bunch, and this has pretty much been the standard amount of secondaries being lost in a game. 1 or 2 secondary amounts. If you get under sustained HE fire in the Schlieffen, your secondary amounts are going to be the least thing you're worried about, because if you get under sustained fire in the Schlieffen, you're going to die, because the ship only has 76,000 HP, and its armor is so thin that most HE spammers at tier 10 can really just have their way with it. So the secondaries aren't going to be your issue if you're getting HE spam that hard. Something like the levels of being concentrated by 2 Thunderers, or 2 or 3 really, really, really good HE spamming ships like Conqueror, Thunder, and a Goliath. Like, you can survive that in the GK because of its health pool. And yeah, all your secondaries and A guns are going to be broken after that encounter, but your ship will still be there. And in the Schlieffen, it won't be there. So it feels pretty safe to say that the Schlieffen is still very strong, still very powerful. And yes, if you do wind up losing secondary mounts, say you do get that roll where the Conqueror does wipe out half your secondary mounts on one side, that does suck, but that's just the nature of the game. And it was an unfair advantage that the main gimmick of the Schlieffen, her secondaries, were nigh indestructible. So yeah, it needed to be patched, because this ship would be absolutely ridiculous if it would never happen. You would never lose your secondary guns, never lose your torpedoes, and couldn't knock out the main battery guns either. So it's a fair change back. The ship is still very strong and absolutely tons of fun. This is probably one of my funnest matches I've had in the Schlieffen that you're watching right now. And if your experience has changed very much with the secondary bug being fixed in the Schlieffen, or other German battleships for that matter. So again, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. We're at 35,000 subs, and I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.